Even as the keels were being laid for HMS Colossus and HMS Hercules, the Royal Navy knew these would be its last 12-inch armed capital ships, for it had already been decided that further ships would use what was still officially classified as the 12-inch 50 caliber A-type gun, which was a cover for the considerably larger and hopefully more reliable 13.5-inch 45 caliber weapon. This wouldn't be the last time the British concealed the true size of a gun with misleading public labelling, but in any case, the next class of ship would be innovative in more ways than just carrying the most powerful main battery of any capital ship thus far. All previous British dreadnoughts had carried some of their main armament in wing turrets. This meant that either they could not use their entire main battery on a broadside, or in the case of the last three ships, Neptune, Colossus and Hercules, only on an extremely narrow arc. But the increased size, cost and power of the new guns made these kinds of arrangements impractical for a whole slew of reasons, and so the new ships would not only be the first dreadnoughts to carry a larger gun than a 12-inch weapon, they would also be the first British battleships since Lord Nelson and Agamemnon to have all their guns on the centre line, which I'm sure induced a measure of sarcastic slow clapping from people like, say, the US Navy. Another innovation was increased range, coming not just courtesy of increased gun power, but also increased elevation, with the turrets capable of 20 degrees of elevation as opposed to the 15-degree limit found on older ships, at least at the time of their construction. A unique feature was a splinter and blast screen that was fitted around the boat deck to try and protect the ship's boats from suffering indirect damage in battle. As it was fairly certain that other navies would follow suit sooner or later, the new ships would also need substantially better armour protection. This was provided not only in thickness, but also in layout, with the thinner upper strakes of the belt armour being carried all the way to the upper deck, and the machinery spaces protected not just by armour decks joining the top and bottom of the belt, but also in between these by substantial coal bunkers, as it was reckoned that about a 1 foot of coal offered the same resistance as 1 inch of steel. Due to the complex politics surrounding the We Want 8 and We Won't Wait public campaign, and the government being forced to perform a screaming U-turn on its plans to cut the naval budget, the resulting class, the Orions, would be laid down over 2 years. Orion herself in November 1909, paralleled by the battlecruiser Lion, and the other three, Monarch, Conqueror and Thunderer, being laid down in April 1910, shortly followed by the battlecruiser HMS Princess Royal. Orion would thus launch in August 1910, the others in early 1911, but all would commission over the course of 1912, with Orion starting out in January and Conqueror coming last in December. Dubbed super dreadnoughts by many at the time due to their jump in firepower, they carried their 10 13.5-inch guns in 5 twin turrets, a pair super-firing forward, a similar pair aft, and a single turret amidships. The secondary battery was composed of 16 single 4-inch guns positioned in the fore and aft superstructures, along with a trio of submerged torpedo tubes, one on each side and one astern. Armour was 12 inches thick on the thickest part of the belt, with the deck armour being made up of several layers, the single thickest portion being 4 inches on the lowest of these decks. Speed was 21 knots courtesy of 4 screws and 27,000 shaft horsepower. As with all British dreadnoughts, they were primarily powered by coal but with supplemental oil spraying, and so carried both types of fuel, although on trials they would manage to exceed 22 knots, just about. Displacement had jumped by about 2,000 tons compared to the previous 12-inch armed ships, to a total of just over 22,000 tons. The 4 ships made up the 2nd Division of 2nd Battle Squadron at Jutland, which placed them right near the head of the line, with the class collectively scoring hits on the battleships König and Markgraf, as well as the battlecruiser Lützow. Although 13.5-inch armed ships, they were rapidly moved to reserve status at the end of the war. Although they were often brought out of this state spending time as training ships more immediately, and then in 1920 and 21 as fast transports for troops heading to and from the Mediterranean. All 4 ships were listed for disposal under the terms of the Washington Naval Treaty, and they were the newest British battleships to end up on that particular list. Orion and Conqueror were thus sold for scrap in 1922, barely a decade after entering service. Monarch was used as a target ship, modified to have underwater protection similar to the upcoming Nelson class, and she was then used to test the effects of bombings and bombs, since the bombing scored poorly in terms of accuracy, and thus they put bombs placed manually inside her and detonated to work out what the effects were instead. Finally, in 1925, she was towed out into the Channel and used for target practice by aircraft, destroyers and cruisers, then finally by the entire Revenge class plus Hood and Repulse, with the old ship finally succumbing to the battlecruiser attack. Thunderer spent most of the 1920s as a training ship before eventually being sold for scrap in 1926, although it turned out she was actually of too deep a draft to get to the scrapyard, and she had to be stripped down twice whilst at sea before she floated high enough to finally reach Blythe, which delayed her final scrapping until 1927.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.